What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Marvel's Midnight Suns, the recently released TRPG focusing on, of course, Marvel superheroes facing off against some demonic entities. I'll be blunt here at the beginning, my first impressions of this game are very mixed. There are a few things I like and a lot of things I don't care for, some of which I've talked about previously, as this is a channel that focuses on this genre pretty heavily. So as you might imagine, I've got a lot to say, but that said, I will be reviewing this title in full, but it is going to take me a little while as there's a lot to get through here. I'm going to start this video out with the positive things, and then we're going to talk about some of the issues I've ran into and things I don't care for. So on the positive side of things, the combat is pretty solid. I don't personally care for card mechanics, but I do think they've implemented it in a way that is reasonable enough. However, because it's card mechanics, there is of course a deck building aspect to it, which involves somewhat randomized mechanics in-game that thankfully don't cost any money, real world currency, but we'll double back to that in a second. And that's just not a system that I care for much. That is a personal bias, I admit, and I can see past it enough to admit that the combat in spite of that is decent enough. You'll typically have 3 heroes with you in a fight, each of which has an 8-card deck. You'll draw cards every turn, you can discard a few to redraw some. You can also move your heroes around the battlefield pretty freely to set up your attacks, albeit the number of times you can move is pretty limited. And there's even environment stuff to interact with. And effectively what they've done here is they've used the card system to replace random hit chance that you typically see in other RPGs like this, and for the most part it works. It's admittedly more fun than I thought it would be going into it. However, I do think that the focus of a TRPG should be the combat, and in about 5 hours of gameplay, I've had like maybe 4 or 5 fights, because most of what I've spent the beginning of the game doing is listening to what I would consider pretty juvenile writing. A significant portion, at least of the early game here, is the story and hanging out in the sort of hub area called the Abbey, as the game sets up the story and introduces all these heroes, and unfortunately, a lot of that is done through a ton of dialogue and writing that really just fails across the board. It's just constant, poorly written jokes, poorly thought out dialogue, a lot of which serves no real purpose, and it's honestly kind of annoying. But after you get through a few hours of that, it does kind of focus more on the gameplay itself, which is nice. And if that was the only issue, I don't think it would be a big deal. But then we run into other issues. This is a full-price single-player game, and there are currencies everywhere, there's microtransactions to acquire cosmetics, and I find that really annoying. It makes the game feel like more of a cash grab than an attempt to make a good game, especially combined with the pretty lackluster writing. And I think all of that is a shame because despite some, again, personal bias against card mechanics, I do think the combat is good enough to stand on its own here. You didn't need to do all this other stuff. And that's the part that makes it feel like a cash grab to me. While I personally haven't experienced any technical issues, I've also seen a few people saying that they're having issues like that. And all of that really gets in the way of the good parts of this game. For instance, you can sort of customize your own hero at the beginning, and while the character isn't unique really, you play the hunter who has a sort of set background and everything, so you're not like genuinely making your own superhero. There is a customizable hero that you play as, which I thought was a pretty cool idea. You can even customize their abilities a lot to kind of make them a more flexible hero than a lot of the other ones. And I'm honestly enjoying the combat a lot more than I thought I would. And that pretty much sums up my first impressions of this game. The thing I was worried about, ironically, turned out to be probably the least of this game's problems, which is the card mechanics combat, because that part I'm actually enjoying, strangely enough. I would prefer if it wasn't card mechanics, I admit, but the way they've implemented it here really isn't bad. Unfortunately, a lot of the rest of it kind of is. Despite that though, I will still be giving the game its due, getting 100% on it, and then doing the proper review, which hopefully won't take too long. We do have the Rogue Trader Alpha coming up, so I will be busy. But we will get this done, and then we'll shift back to Alpha Protocol. There's my impressions of Marvel's Midnight Suns, a real mixed bag. We'll see how it goes from here. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.